Hello and welcome to the program. I'm Chiang Youth.
And I'm Fuad Haider. Coming up, the latest reaction to Budget 2015. Business is booming for Melbourne's pawnbrokers, and Texas executes another mentally ill prisoner. First, though, to the fallout from last night's budget. We're joined by Jess Davis.
Fuad, the budget handed down last night by Treasurer Joe Hockey had a vastly different feel to last year's budget. The rhetoric of a debt and deficit emergency has faded, and we now have a big spending budget in front of us.
Explain to me why there's been the change in emphasis and language.
Because we're fixing the problem.
Because I just pointed out to you that net debt is going to peak at 18% of GDP.
Because we are trying to get the deficits down, and when you get a deficit down to zero and you start running surpluses, that's when you can start paying back debt.
Joe Hockey there talking with ABC's Lee Sales. So what are the government's opponents saying? This year's budget has been labelled as a political document and a major backflip on last year's. Critics say the budget is aimed at winning back both public support and the support of the Abbott government's backbench. Shadow Treasurer Chris Bowen is also accusing Joe Hockey of using shoddy figures. Here he is with Fairfax Media today.
The government set the test of reducing the budget deficit. Now, the budget documents show the budget deficit has doubled on Mr Hockey's watch compared to his own projections just 12 months ago, over 4 years. So put aside any argument about the budget deficit he inherited, and there is a big argument because he uses the wrong figure, but even the figures that he used himself last year shows the budget deficit over 4 years doubling with this budget he's brought down tonight. So you see the debt and deficit up, taxes up, spending up, unemployment higher for longer.
So who are the winners and losers? The winners in this year's budget include small business owners. Small businesses will be able to claim a tax break on up to $20,000 worth of equipment. Northern Australia is also on the winners list with a focus on developing the north. A $5 billion loan facility will be set up to encourage infrastructure, a plan that the Coalition's Andrew Robb has been pushing for many years. National security rhetoric continues with a massive boost to Australia's Foreign Intelligence Agency and our booming data retention industry. On the other side of the coin, foreign aid is seeing a cut of $3.7 billion over the next 3 years, with 70% of aid to Africa being cut and 40% of aid to Indonesia.
And what are the major changes the government has made on last year's budget, Jess?
Well, after last year's harsh youth unemployment measures, the budget contains a $330 million package towards youth unemployment. And the government has retreated from its 6-month waiting period for young people on the dole, introducing a 4-week waiting period instead. This waiting period is still considered by many as a punitive measure and is unlikely to garner Senate support. Despite a backflip by the government on the Medicare co-payment, the 4-year freeze on Medicare rebates remains in place, with doctors likely to pass losses on to patients. Many of last year's controversial budget proposals remain unresolved. Higher education, for example, rates little mention in yesterday's budget, confirming they aren't backing down on higher education deregulation. Back to you, Chang.
Thanks, Jess. With living costs at an all-time high, Australians are looking for ways to make money and fast. Emily Taliangas reports on the recent growth in business for pawnbrokers and second-hand dealers.
Financial times may be tough for the average Australian, but for pawnbrokers, business couldn't be better.
There's been more and more musical instruments coming into the store, so obviously things are going a little bit tough for the musos.
There has been a massive jump in the number of Australians buying from and selling to pawnbrokers and second-hand dealers.
All walks of life come into the store, from gamblers to drug problem people to the normal housewives, and business is good on both sides, the purchasing and also the sales.
Desperate Australians are using pawn shops to take out short-term cash loans in exchange for their possessions.
Yeah, I've sold heaps of stuff. I'm a carpenter, I've sold all my tools, I've sold all my gold, I've sold my PlayStation, sold PlayStation games. Yeah, I've done the works.
But for pawnbrokers and second-hand dealers, this is a risky business. They must have a valid licence and are regulated according to the Second-Hand Dealers and Pawnbrokers Act. The Act outlines laws regarding registration, conduct of business, disputes as to the ownership of goods, and also enforcement. Business owners must keep formal records, which are monitored regularly by police.
The police come in and check the book, and if they've checked it and the item happens to be stolen, we lose our money.
This footage shows a man's television and bike being rejected, as pawnbroker Arno suspects they may be stolen.
Protecting your business is protecting your money, so there's no pleasure in losing money.
I've always got my stuff back, but they rip you off.
In this time of economic uncertainty, at least our pawnbrokers have a business model that just can't fail. Emily Tully-Angus, Newsline.
Thanks, Emily. To the death penalty, Texas has just executed its 7th prisoner this year, putting to death 32-year-old Derek Charles. Charles was convicted of murdering his 15-year-old girlfriend, her mother and grandfather. He committed the crimes when he was 19 years old. His legal team argued that he should have been exempt from execution due to mental illness that he'd suffered since childhood. The state of Texas disagreed. It reflects a recent failed attempt in Indonesia to hold the execution of a Brazilian man who was suffering from schizophrenia. Rodrigo Goularte was executed by firing squad alongside Australians Myron Sukumaran and Andrew Chan. The lack of mercy shown to death row prisoners who are either mentally ill or rehabilitated, as in the case of the 2 Australians, is causing widespread public outcry. While Australia's government insists it opposes the death penalty in all countries, it has not yet addressed the issue of how Australia is to deal with countries who implement it. Australia's ambassador to Indonesia was recalled after the executions of Chan and Sukumaran, and no announcement has been made as to when relations will be normalised. Here's Paul Shapiro with a review of Tim Burton's latest movie, Big Eyes.
Thanks, Fuad. Tim Burton's easily recognisable, over-the-top style is largely missing from his latest film. Big Eyes tells a remarkable true story of 1950s and 60s pop art icon Margaret Keane and her famous waifs, which were taken credit for by her charismatic husband Walter Keane. The big winner in this thoroughly engaging tale is the acting. Amy Adams glowing in the role of Margaret. She brings a fine balance of vulnerability and quiet confidence to the role. And Christoph Waltz is in scene-stealing form in the role of the narcissistic but essentially hollow Walter.
The eyes are the windows of the soul. That's why I paint them so big. I've always done it that way.
Why are you lying?
Sadly, people don't buy lady art. The painting says keen. I'm keen, you're keen. Smile.
But Burton barely scrapes the surface of character, and this is ultimately where the film falls down. His production style is colourful and vibrant, but the film offers little else of substance. It was debatable if Keane's work was art, and the same query could apply to Burton's film. What should have been a deftly layered drama turned into a by-the-numbers biopic, churned out with the same attention afforded to a keen, big-eyed prince. The fascination of the story will keep people writing until the end, but film lovers will ultimately see through the facade. 2.5 stars, Chen.
Thanks, Paul. Still to come on Newsline, violence against nurses in our hospitals and Richmond Football Club under scrutiny over their players' list.
Welcome back. Still to come, Richmond Football Club in strife over its players list and all the latest in our awful weather. First though, Victoria's nurses say they're facing daily violence and harassment, and what's worse is their workplace culture stops them from reporting it. Emma Cohen reports on conflict in our wards.
The Australian Nursing and Midwifery Foundation says hospitals are not doing enough to encourage nurses to report violence at work.
I think one of the biggest issues is to actually have a management that are supportive of the whole concept that violence isn't a part of their job and violence isn't a part of their workplace. We don't have that yet. We don't have very many managers at hospital facilities actually standing up and walking the walk in that respect.
70% of Victorian nurses told Monash University they faced aggression from patients and families each year, 25% on a regular basis.
Yeah, they're pretty scary. Like when you first have someone who's disagreeing with you or shouts at you over the bed or is clinically aggressive, like I don't remember what that feels like. I don't remember the situation. I remember that I felt sick. You know, you feel sick in your stomach, you want to run away, and you sort of look at yourself and go, why am I in this job? Like, what am I doing here?
But nurses on the ground say they simply do not have time to file reports and care for all their patients.
Basically, we're always trained to escalate it up to the nurse in charge, but sometimes that's impossible if you're sort of physically entangled with a patient. Basically all we were ever told was tell the nurse in charge. However, at the time, it's kind of like think on your feet.
Last year, then opposition leader Daniel Andrews signed off on a 10-point plan to address violence in our hospitals, including better reporting procedures and security on our wards. This is currently being rolled out across the state, but nurses say they can't wait for better reporting procedures.
In reality, the fact is we're almost on the edge of our seats, hoping that we don't get the call to let us know that a nurse is being killed. We are very fearful that that's what's going to happen, so we hope that real action is going to be taken sooner rather than later to make sure that that doesn't actually happen.
Until then, they will be silently getting on with the job. Emma Kewen, Newsline.
Thanks, Emma. And here's Mitch Spivey with the latest in sport.
Thanks. In sports news tonight, to the AFL, has Richmond overrated its own list? The Tigers have come under scrutiny after last year's quiet trade and free agency period. The Tigers, who are currently 2 wins and 4 losses after round 6, are coming off a dismal performance against North Melbourne. Tigers coach Damien Hardwick is doubtful his list oozes enough class going forward.
We just got to take stock, we've got to look at the tape, we've got to find out guys that are playing at our VFL level, which had a good win today, that are capable of taking us forward, because at the moment, you know, the inconsistency of performance of some of our players is not good enough. And we've got to find players that are prepared to put their hand up and play the Richmond way.
To other AFL news, Port Adelaide veteran Kane Corns is expected to play his 300th and final game in round 8 against Richmond. He's the only player left from Port Adelaide's maiden premiership team in 2004. And now to the cricket. England's cricket team has been labelled a laughingstock after England's Director of Cricket, Andrew Strauss, denied batsman Kevin Peterson an international recall. Cricket greats have let their disapproval out on Twitter. Back to you, Chan.
Thanks, Mitch. And now to the weather. It was mostly a wet and cloudy day in Melbourne with a top of 13. There were always heavy showers in Geelong, which reached a top of 14. Tomorrow, more the same. Cloudy and wet in both Melbourne and Geelong, with temperatures expected to reach just 15 and 16 respectively. And that's it for tonight. Thanks for joining in. I hope you can join us again tomorrow on Newsline.
We'll be back tomorrow from 6. Thank you and good night.